I had just checked my bank account that evening, and the numbers glowed back at me like a cruel joke. Rent overdue, utility bills stacking up, barely enough left for groceries. My wife didn't even ask anymore. She already knew what the answer would be. Every night after the kids went to bed, we sat at the kitchen table with bills spread between us like a battlefield. Her eyes carried that same tired fear, the kind that made me hate myself more each day. I used to believe I'd do better. I went to school, worked hard, thought I'd land a job that meant something. Instead, I was stuck dragging home a paycheck that couldn't cover half our needs. I kept telling myself I should have found something bigger, something worthy of all those years I wasted studying. That night, staring at the glow of my phone screen and the pitiful balance it displayed, I made a decision. I needed a second job. Something overnight, something quiet, something that paid enough to keep us afloat. I didn't expect to find it so quickly. The gas station sat alone on the edge of the highway, its neon sign buzzing against the night. I pulled in just for gas, but as I walked to the door, I saw the paper taped to the glass. Night shift position available. Immediate start. $25 an hour. Cash. I froze. $25 an hour, more than my day job. Enough to cover bills. Enough to breathe. Inside, the place smelled faintly of gasoline and dust. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s, his hair thinning, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He looked up at me with unreadable eyes. "You here for gas, or?" His voice trailed off as he nodded toward the sign. "The job," I said. "You still need someone?" He didn't hesitate. He pulled a thin contract from under the counter and slid it toward me with a pen. The pay was exactly as advertised. Cash, no questions asked. My heart thudded as I signed my name before he could change his mind. When I pushed the paper back, he gave a tired half smile. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Jack," he said quietly, "when you're here, just make sure you follow the rules." "That's all I ask." "Rules?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You'll see them," he replied. "They'll be waiting for you when your shift starts tomorrow night." Before I could press him further, he slipped the contract into a folder, pulled on his jacket, and muttered a quick, "Good luck." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the quiet hum of the station, contract signed and heart pounding. Driving home, I thought about my wife's face when I told her, about how the bills might finally shrink instead of growing, about how maybe I could stop feeling like a failure. That night, I went to bed with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not dread, hope. Tomorrow night, my new life would begin. I showed up the next evening just before 11. The gas station sat like a lonely beacon off the highway, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. The parking lot was nearly empty, only one car pulling away as I stepped inside. A young man stood behind the counter. His hair was messy, his uniform shirt wrinkled, and the dark circles under his eyes told me he'd been there far too long. "You must be Jack," he said, his voice flat but edged with relief. "Yeah, night shift." "Good. I've been waiting to get out of here all day. Keys are in the office, notebooks on the desk. You'll know what I mean." Before I could ask, he was already halfway to the door. "Good luck," he muttered, pushing outside without looking back. The bell above the entrance jingled once, then left me with silence. And just like that, the station was mine. The stillness pressed in as I made my way to the back. The office was a small, windowless room at the end of a short hallway. The light above buzzed faintly, flickering every few seconds like it was breathing in time with me. On the desk sat the notebook, same one the manager had mentioned. Same one he had slipped across the counter like it was more important than the contract itself. A sticky note clung to the cover. My name was scrawled across it in block letters. Jack. I pulled out the chair, sat down, and opened it. The first page was written in a neat, deliberate hand. Rule 1. Lock all doors at midnight. That was it. Simple, almost laughable. I checked the clock. 11:30, half an hour to kill. I wandered the aisles, trying to ground myself in the normal details. Rows of chips stacked neatly, candy bars lined up like soldiers, racks of old magazines gathering dust. The refrigerators along the back hummed steadily, their glass doors glowing faintly in the fluorescent light. A pot of stale coffee sat on the warmer, black and burnt, filling the air with its bitter smell. Everything was ordinary, too ordinary. By 11:50, the minutes felt like hours. My ears seemed tuned to every sound, the drip of the coffee machine, the buzz of the lights, the faint click of the clock above the counter. Each one made me turn my head, convinced I'd find someone standing there. At 11:55, I started my checks. The front door first. I turned the deadbolt until it clicked, then tugged the handle to be sure. Locked. The side door near the restroom was next. The knob resisted, swollen with age, but after some effort the lock slid into place with a heavy clunk. Both doors secure. Easy. I walked back to the counter, feeling oddly proud of myself, like I'd just passed an invisible test. The notebook sat waiting, its single line of instructions staring back at me. At 11:59, I sat down, hands pressed against the counter, heart thudding as the second hand crawled toward 12. Midnight. The change was instant. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the entire building had shifted. The humming of the refrigerators flattened to a low drone. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, but even that sound seemed swallowed by the silence that now pressed against my ears. I sat frozen, waiting, and then I heard it, a faint creak, the soft groan of metal hinges. My head snapped toward the front door, still locked. The side door, locked too. The sound came again, not from the front, not from the side, from the back. I forced myself down the hallway, every step too loud against the linoleum. The light overhead flickered once, twice, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch with each buzz. At the very end stood a small metal door, half hidden in shadow, marked with a peeling sticker. Storage, and it was standing wide open. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I hadn't touched that door. Inside, the dark seemed thicker than it should have been, swallowing the light that fell through the opening. A can rolled slowly across the floor, rattling as it spun to a stop against the frame. Something had moved, something unseen. My hand shook as I fumbled for the keys left on the desk. The third one slid into the lock perfectly. I pushed the door shut, the hinges shrieking as if they resented being disturbed. A breath of cold, stale air rushed out, carrying a faint sourness, like fruit left too long in the sun. The moment the lock clicked into place, the sound stopped. No creaking, no rolling cans, only silence. I stepped back, staring at the grey door, my heart hammering. The hallway looked ordinary again, but the silence didn't feel safe. It felt watchful. I tried to steady my breathing, but the thought gnawed at me. If I hadn't heard it, if I'd waited at the counter another minute, what would I have found when I finally came back here? Or worse, what would have found me? I pressed my back to the wall and listened. Nothing. No movement, no whispers, just that suffocating silence, stretched thin and trembling. The rule had saved me once, but the night was only beginning. By 12:15, the station was quiet again. The silence had a weight to it, pressing down on the aisles, on the shelves, on my chest. For a moment, I considered leaving the doors locked all night, but when headlights swept across the pumps, I panicked. A man in a truck stepped out, yawning, rubbing his eyes as he filled his tank. He glanced at the station door, expecting it to open. My hand hovered over the keyring. If I don't let him in, he'll leave, and the manager will want answers. I unlocked the front door. The click echoed too loudly in the stillness. The man came in, bought a coffee and a candy bar, paid in crumpled bills, and left without saying much. The bell jingled behind him, and soon the lot was empty again. I locked the door the second he was gone. Normal, too normal. Back at the counter, I opened the notebook. The next page waited for me, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. Rule 2. Never sell cigarettes after 1 a.m. That was it. No explanation, just a single command. I glanced at the shelves behind me where the cartons sat stacked in neat rows. Ordinary, harmless. Why after 1? The minutes crawled. 12:30, 12:45. The silence grew thicker, each tick of the clock loud enough to make me flinch. I poured myself a cup of coffee just to fill the void, but it was burnt and bitter, coating my mouth like ash. At 12:55, headlights cut across the glass again. A tall, pale man stepped inside, walking straight to the counter. "Cigarettes," he said. I glanced at the clock. 12:59, 1 minute left. I handed him a pack, took his exact change, and watched him leave. His car pulled away, tail lights fading into the dark. The second hand ticked forward. 1 a.m. The air shifted again. The silence grew heavier, thicker, as if the building itself was holding its breath. My chest tightened. The bell chimed. Another man stepped inside. He was taller than the last, his shoulders hunched, his skin pale like candle wax. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. They seemed to drift, focusing on something just past me, as though I were a shadow and the real thing he wanted was behind me. He approached the counter slowly. "Cigarettes," he said. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. The clock read 1:03. I swallowed hard. I can't." His head tilted. "They're right there." "I'm sorry, store policy." For a moment his expression didn't change. Then he leaned forward, closer than anyone ever should, his breath brushing against my cheek. It smelled faintly of ash, sharp and acrid, like a fireplace long burned out. His lips parted just slightly. "Do you know what happens if you say no?" My hands gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. "I'm not allowed." The corners of his mouth twitched. Not into a smile, something else. His lips stretched too far, revealing the faintest line of teeth, grey and uneven, like stones pulled from the earth. Smoke curled at the edges of his mouth, faint wisps rising as if his lungs were smouldering inside. I wanted to step back, but my legs refused to move. "You think rules will save you?" he whispered, voice thin and rattling. "But rules don't keep things out. They let things in." His words seeped into me like poison. My chest tightened until every breath felt shallow. I thought about the storage door, about the silence that rushed out when I closed it, and I knew he was right about one thing. The rules weren't protecting me, they were binding me. I forced myself to shake my head. "No sale." For a long moment he didn't move, just stared, his hollow eyes boring into mine, smoke trickling from his lips. Then, slowly, he straightened. His body seemed to stretch unnaturally tall, scraping against the fluorescent glow. A hiss escaped him, a sound like steam escaping a vent, low and angry. Finally, he turned. He walked back to the door, each step deliberate. The bell chimed weakly as he left, but the sound felt wrong, bent somehow, like metal warped under pressure. Through the glass, I saw him climb into a car, but the engine didn't start. The headlights never turned on. The car just sat there, dark, silent, as if it had always been part of the lot. When I blinked, it was gone. I locked the door with shaking hands, my reflection pale and fractured in the glass. The notebook lay open on the counter. The neat handwriting stared back at me like a threat. Never sell cigarettes after 1 a.m. And now I knew why, because after 1 o'clock, the people who came in weren't really people at all. The notebook lay open on the counter, and the next line was written in the same neat, patient ink, as if someone had taken their time carving the letters into the page. Rule 3. If the phone rings, answer only if you hear your own voice. I read it twice, then a third time, like repetition might wring meaning from the words. Answer only if you hear your own voice. Not a familiar voice, not a co-worker, not the manager, your own. I glanced at the phone mounted to the wall. I hadn't really noticed it until now. It wasn't a modern handset. It was older, heavy, black, the rotary kind with a coiled cord that seemed to memorize every twist it had ever made. The receiver sat in its cradle like a little head laid down to sleep, and the dial was dust-glossed and innocent. It looked like it should be in a museum. It looked like it should never ring again. The coolers hummed along the back wall, a sound I had begun to map by heart. The little shiver when one compressor kicked on, the throatier tone of another reaching for life. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in a high, tired note, as though they had been left on for a very long time and were starting to resent it. Somewhere behind me, one tile of the drop ceiling clicked every couple of minutes, expanding and thinking about its choices. The station was small, predictable. That should have helped. It didn't. I set my palm on the notebook and felt the texture of the paper, tiny ridges under my fingertips, as if the page itself were breathing. Answer only if you hear your own voice. Why my own? Who else would be calling? It occurred to me that I hadn't given this number to anyone. I didn't even know the number. I told myself a dozen reasonable things: telemarketers, wrong numbers, a board manager doing a check-in from home. But the reasonableness sounded thin and tinny in my head. I kept seeing in the corner of my eye the storage door at the end of the hall. The key still hung in it, turned, an iron line through the idea of open. I kept seeing the last customer's eyes, how carefully not quite they had looked at me when he asked for cigarettes after 1 o'clock. The rules weren't explaining themselves. They were boxing in the night, making little fences in the dark. And fences don't always keep things out. The clock on the wall said 1:14. I stared at its second hand for so long the little jump started to look like a trick. I forced myself to take a breath, then another. I counted to 5. I told myself not every minute of this shift would be a test. At 1:16 the phone rang. The sound wasn't like a phone sound should be. It was too bright, metallic and sharp. A bell struck in a small, hard room. It made the softest things in the station jump. The coffee in the pot trembled, the dust in the light above me wavered as though the note had moved through it. My spine locked. I was on my feet with my hand halfway out before I even knew I was moving. It rang again. That strange brightness woke the air, split it into slices. I stood there with my hand hovering over the receiver, and all at once I understood the rule's shape. It wasn't telling me to ignore the phone, it was telling me to listen first. It wasn't asking me to be a coward, it was asking me to be precise. I lifted the receiver a fraction and held it just off the cradle so that the bell cut away and a dense, stuffed silence took its place. I brought it to my ear. Hello? My voice sounded borrowed. Static spilled into me. Not white noise, grey, full and dirty, the hiss you hear when wind pushes through weeds taller than your head. Somewhere under it there were voices, maybe, or the shapes of voices. I couldn't catch them, they weren't meant for me. The static swelled and receded like breath. No echo, no mirror, not my voice. I set the receiver back down as gently as I could and found my hand shaking anyway. The quiet afterward was worse than the ringing had been. It felt like the station had listened with me, learned something I hadn't. I stared at the black plastic cradle and the way dust had settled in the little groove where the cord began. I told myself this was fine. One test, passed. I checked the front door without standing up. I checked the side door in my thoughts. I told myself to drink some coffee and couldn't make my hand reach for the pot. At 1:29 the phone rang again. The noise shot through me. I grabbed the receiver too quickly and knocked it against the cradle. The bell cut off mid-blare and a ragged little echo rattled in the metal somewhere inside the wall, as if the sound had sloshed over a lip and was trying to climb back out. I didn't say anything. I held the receiver to my ear and listened. At first, nothing. The kind of nothing that has a shape to it. The shape of a room when no one is breathing. Then a breath. Soft human. Jack, a voice said. My name, in my own voice. Something in my chest went cold and clean, like a coin dropped into a deep glass of water. It was me. It was someone wearing me. The vowels were right. The weight of the K at the end was right. The little hitch I have when I'm trying not to show I'm afraid. Everything was right except the distance. The voice sounded like it was coming from a room I had just left, even though it was pressed right against my ear. "Jack," it said again, gentle. "You're doing well." I swallowed. My throat clicked like something old. "Who is this?" I asked, and hated myself for asking. The rules didn't say I could interrogate. The rules didn't tell me what to do next. The rules never tell you what to do next. The voice on the line did a thing that might have been laughter, except it didn't move any air. It made a small, dry sound that reminded me of paper sliding across paper. "It's you," it said. "We're you. Keep following the rules. We're." I held very still. From somewhere far away, a long ways down the highway, or a long ways down the line, I heard a soft grating, as of a chair being drawn back over tile. The voice shifted. "Listen," it said, and this time it wasn't gentle. "Don't turn around." My body understood before my brain did. Every small muscle that keeps a person upright clenched. The skin on the back of my neck became a map of places I have never been. The receiver grew slick against my palm. "Don't," the voice said again, and because it was my voice, I heard exactly how many layers of fear it was hiding. I hadn't moved. I hadn't even thought about turning around until the words said not to. Now every part of me was aware of the aisle behind the counter, of the cold seam where the linoleum meets the baseboard, of the rectangle of hallway where the office door was ajar and the storage door beyond it sat like a closed eye. The phone cord ticked against the counter. My breathing sounded like someone else's. "Why?" I said, and the word came out thin. "What's there?" On the line, a little static, like wind fingering leaves. Then, "If you see it, it stays." Something moved behind me. It was not loud, it was small, like the way a heavy thing tries to be small. A weight redistributed, a sigh pressed through a slit. The air on the back of my neck cooled a half degree. The receptors along my skin lit in a path. The path stopped just behind my right ear. "Don't turn around," the voice said softly, almost kindly. "You're doing well." I fixed my eyes on the smudged glass of the pastry case. There were no pastries in it. There hadn't been for months by the look of the dust. In the glass I could see a little trapezoid of reflection. The curve of my cheek, the line of my jaw, the counter behind me blurring out to a grey strip where the hall began. Beyond that, nothing reflected. The glass had given up on showing me a world. Something behind me took in a breath. Not air into lungs exactly, the way a room takes in a breath when a door opens on a cold night and the temperature looks for a new home. The scent that came with it made my eyes water. Hot copper and the sweetness you get off an engine that's been running too long. "Talk to me," I told the voice in my ear, because the words felt like a tether I could hold. "Say something." "Think about your wife," the voice said. It was mine, but under it was an echo I didn't recognize, as if an empty auditorium had leaned down to loan it a little of its shape. "Think about your kids. Think about how you're going to spend the money. Think about not turning around." My eyes burned. The most dangerous thing in the world is a soft thing in a hard place. I pictured my wife's hand on the kitchen table, the way she presses her thumb into the wood when she's worried, as if she could leave a mark that would explain everything later. I pictured my kids asleep, their mouths open a little, dreaming the harmless dreams of people who believe in doors that open and close and nothing in between. Behind me, something that had weight shifted that weight to its other foot. The phone receiver ticked in my hand as if the plastic were cooling. The cord brushed my wrist like a slow, deliberate thing. I licked my lips and tasted salt. I could feel it, the shape of a height, the idea of a shoulder where a shoulder should not be, the rumor of a head at a place that would fit a head if a person were standing inside the thin layer of space people leave behind them when they move through the world. "Don't," the voice whispered. "Don't look. If you see it, it stays," I finished, and the words came out steadier than I felt. Silence held. The coolers hummed. A fluorescent bulb somewhere tried to start a fight with itself and lost. The thing behind me did not leave. It did not touch me. It did not breathe, except in the way rooms breathe when you think about them too hard. The line in my ear went quiet as a mouth closed. I was sure the call had ended. Then, very gently, my voice said, "Good. Jack." The click when the line actually died was so small it would have been easy to miss if every part of my body hadn't been straining to hear it. The world returned by degrees. The rattle of a cooler fan, the distant rush of a semi on the highway, the small tick of the clock's second hand skidding into the next minute. The thing behind me stayed. I don't know how long I stood there with the dead receiver pressed to my ear. Time is a trick the mind plays to keep itself from seeing what it's staring at. Eventually, my hand remembered it could lower itself. I put the receiver down. It settled into its cradle with a tender little sound, as if I had put a sleeping animal back in a box. I did not turn around. I waited until the clock said 1:58. Then I waited until it said 1:59 because some part of me believed the number mattered. I stared at the coffee pot until I could see the surface vibrate with my pulse. I told my legs to bend and they refused. I told my lungs to fill and they did, but they made me pay for it. When I finally moved, I moved sideways, 2 careful steps along the counter, keeping my back exactly where it was, forcing the angle of my shoulders to slide without changing the way my head faced. My hand found the lock on the register without looking. My other hand found the lip of the counter and gripped it until the wood dug into my skin. One more small slide. Another. I reached the far end of the counter where a little mirror hung to let you see the aisle behind you while you stocked cigarettes. I looked into the mirror. The glass showed the aisle empty, the hall empty, the office door ajar, the storage door still shut with the key turned. Nothing stood behind me, nothing at all. I laughed, a short, breathless sound that didn't sound like me. It hit the mirror and fell back onto my face like rain. I kept staring at the mirror anyway because the relief didn't feel clean. The mirror had a warp to it, all the cheap ones do. The warp put a ripple through the place where a shoulder would be if a shoulder were standing there. The ripple sat there like a memory, and then, slowly, it smoothed. Only when the clock clicked over to 2 did I let myself turn. My spine creaked like an old hinge. There was no one in the aisle. The air where my neck had been cold felt like nothing at all. I set both hands on the counter and bent until my forehead nearly touched the wood. I stayed like that for a long breath and listened to the station be a station. I could hear my heart. I could hear the world continuing. The rules were holding, for now. The phone did not ring again, but long after, when I made myself walk the hallway to the office, just to prove I could, I smelled a faint, almost imaginary sweetness in the air there. The kind you only notice when fruit has been left in a warm car and then taken away. I stood outside the storage door and touched the cool metal with the tips of my fingers. The key was still turned. The idea of open was still a line through. Back at the counter, I flipped the notebook closed. I didn't want to see the next rule yet. I wanted an hour without words telling me which parts of the night were dangerous. I wanted to believe that the quiet meant safety, that my own voice was mine alone. I stared at my reflection in the glass of the front door. It stared back, tired, a little older. For a second, the lights flickered, and my face blurred into something almost like a stranger's. When they steadied, it was just me again. Just me. For now. The notebook waited for me on the counter. I didn't want to open it. Every page so far had stripped away another piece of the night, reshaped the world into something I didn't understand. But my hand moved anyway, turning the paper over, revealing the next line, written in that same deliberate ink. Rule 4. At 3:33 a.m., turn off all the lights for exactly 3 minutes. Do not turn them back on until 3:36. My stomach dropped. The rules had been about survival, locking doors, refusing cigarettes, ignoring voices. They made sense in their own twisted way. But this one wasn't about keeping the lights on. It wanted me to invite the dark in. Why? I set my phone alarm for 3:30 just to be safe. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I double-checked the screen, making sure the volume was all the way up. If I missed it, I didn't want to think about what would happen. The clock read 2:40, almost an hour to wait. I poured stale coffee into a paper cup, sat at the counter, and watched the fluorescent tubes buzz above me. Their light was harsh, cold, but it was light, and I wanted to drown in it. The thought of turning it all off, the aisles, the coolers, even the faint glow from the office, made my throat tighten. The hum of the building pressed in on me. The silence was never really silence here. It was layered with mechanical sighs, buzzing, faint scratches. My eyes drifted to the storage hallway. The door stayed locked, but in the quiet I almost heard it breathing. 3 a.m. The minutes crawled. I stared at my phone on the counter, waiting for the alarm. 3:10, 3:20. I checked again, still set. 3:30, loud as it could go. 3:28. The second hand seemed to drag. My chest felt hollow. 3:30. The alarm didn't go off. I grabbed the phone. The screen was black. Dead. The battery had been full earlier. Now it was gone. No, no, no. My voice cracked in the empty station. I looked at the wall clock. 3:32. 30 seconds. I sprinted around the counter, my shoes squeaking against the linoleum. My hands slapped at the light switches near the door. The bulbs flickered and died, one by one, plunging the front of the store into shadow. I ran down the aisle, flicked another set. Darkness spread like water filling a sink. The coolers hummed low, their glow painted the far wall in pale blue. I hit the switch near them, and that light died too. The office last. My fingers trembled as I pressed it down. The entire station went black. At first, the silence was complete, a silence so deep I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I stood frozen behind the counter, gripping the wood until it dug into my palms. Seconds crawled. 3:34. I should have felt alone, but I didn't. Something shuffled between the aisles, not fast, careful. The sound of feet dragging, pausing, dragging again. I squeezed my eyes shut. My lungs ached as I tried not to breathe too loud. The footsteps stopped, then a voice, soft, familiar. Jack? My eyes shot open, straining against the dark. Right in front of me. It was her voice, my wife's. Jack, it whispered again, closer now. Are you there? My throat closed. My wife was at home. She had to be. A shape moved at the end of the aisle, pale, faint, barely outlined in the thin light leaking through the glass door. It was her, or it looked like her. The figure stood perfectly still, head tilted, hair hanging in a way I recognized too well. My heart thrashed against my ribs. No, I whispered. You're not here. You can't be here. The figure twitched, one sharp, broken movement, like a puppet tugged by the wrong string. Jack. This time the voice came from everywhere, behind me, above me, inside me. The lights overhead flickered once, so faint it might have been my imagination. 3:35, just one more minute. The figure stepped closer. The sound of its feet was wrong, too slow, too heavy. But the shape, the hair, even the curve of the jaw in the faint light. It was her, my wife. Number, something wearing her. The air grew cold, my breath fogged. I dug my nails into the counter, forcing myself to stay still. The thing stopped only a few feet away. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I didn't need to. The voice was enough. Come home, Jack, it whispered. They're waiting. My stomach flipped. The kids. It knew about the kids. Seconds stretched into hours. The dark pressed harder, thicker, wrapping me in a suffocating blanket. I stared at the clock, willing the hands to move. 3:36. The second the minute clicked over, I lunged for the switch. The lights blazed to life. The figure was gone. The aisles stood empty, shelves neat and ordinary. The coolers hummed softly, nothing more. But the cold stayed, hanging in the air like a memory that wouldn't leave. I leaned against the counter, my breath ragged, sweat stinging my eyes. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the notebook when I pulled it close. The rule had saved me, but it hadn't told me the whole truth, because in the glow of the lights, on the linoleum floor between the aisles, were footprints. Bare, wet, leading straight to where I stood, and stopping. The footprints dried in the light, darker first, then fading until they were only the idea of wet. I stood there with the mop in my hand and didn't move. The station looked the way a stage looks after everyone has gone home. Set pieces in their places, lights humming, the quiet honest about being quiet. But the little crescents of water on the linoleum told a different story. They came right up to the counter and stopped, at my shoes. I put the mop back and reached for the notebook because there was nothing else to reach for. The next page had been waiting for me all along, patient. Rule 5. After 4 a.m., never look customers in the face. I read it and felt something in my chest shift. The first rules had been about closing, refusing, listening, obeying the dark when it asked for space. This one was about how to see, or rather, how not to. After 4 o'clock, nights get thin. I've always known that, even before the station. It's the hour when the world forgets itself for a little while and has to be reminded at dawn. Maybe this rule wasn't protection so much as a way to move through that forgetting. The clock said 3:49, 11 minutes before the line. 11 minutes to practice staring at anything but a face. I picked objects to anchor me. The lined-up lighters near the register. Red, red, blue, red, blue. The rip in the vinyl of my stool where the yellow foam peeked out like sick fruit. A hairline crack in the counter I hadn't seen until now that ran like a dry river across the varnish. I imagined forcing my gaze to live in those places, even when a person stood in front of me. Not a person, I corrected myself. A customer. The rule used that word for a reason. 3:56. I thought of my best friend without meaning to. We'd grown up 4 streets apart. We learned to drive in the same dented car, put tape over the check engine light when it nagged us too much. He died on a road that didn't belong to either of us, a curve in late winter with black ice underneath, the kind of death that steals sound out of a room for a beat before the screaming starts. At the funeral, his mother held my hand too tight. I told myself not to think of him. Telling yourself not to think of a thing is the surest way to summon it. 3:59. The second hand started its slow ascent toward the mark that would change the night. I folded the notebook shut and slid it under the counter. My mouth felt dry as though I'd been speaking for hours without saying a word. 4 o'clock. I didn't hear anything at first, just the new weight of that number in the room. Then the bell above the door chimed, gentle and ordinary, the sound a person makes when entering a place that sells coffee and gum. I kept my eyes on the counter. The rule was simple. Simple things are hardest. Shoes on linoleum, steps, the weight of someone deciding where to put their feet. I saw hands before I saw anything else, because hands are allowed. Hands like a man who works with them, not soft, a small scar near the knuckle. He set a bottle of water on the counter. He set a pack of jerky beside it. He waited. "Long night?" the customer asked. My throat went tight. The voice was a key in an old lock. It turned and turned everything else with it. It was my friend's voice. I told myself it wasn't. It couldn't be. But it was the exact hue and grain of it. The little downward smile he put into vowels when he was trying not to laugh. The memory of it hit me so hard I had to touch the counter with 3 fingers to prove I was here. "Yeah," I said. I kept my eyes on the items, ringed them up. "That'll be 432. Coins, crumpled bills, the slide of them across the counter. I opened the drawer without looking up. My heart worked too fast, as if it were trying to draw the shape of him in my chest instead of through my eyes. "Jack," the voice said softly, "you remember the summer we drove to the lake with the radio stuck on one station? And you pretended you liked that song." My hand missed the change slot and a quarter rang against the till. I hadn't told anyone that, not even my wife. It had been ours, a small silliness on a hot day. The song had been everywhere that summer. It still shows up sometimes and brings the lake with it, whether I want it to or not. "I'm not supposed to look," I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to him or to myself. The customer laughed, a sound that tried to be easy and landed just to the left of it. "Always following rules. That's you." The voice leaned closer without getting louder. "Come on, man. I drove all this way. You're not even going to look at me. The bell of the door didn't chime again. No one else entered. The store held its breath. "After 4, I said, hands flat. "I can't." "Can't or won't?" He set his palm on the counter, and the way he did it was perfectly him. Heel first, then fingers fanned. The scar near the knuckle caught the light. "Nerves of glass, remember? That's what you said I had, but you were always the one who looked." The rule thrummed like a live wire under my skin. Never look customers in the face. "Why are you here?" I asked, and tasted the small stupidity of the question as soon as it was out. The night doesn't tell you why, it tells you what and when and how long and leaves you to feel around the rest. "To see you." He leaned in closer. I could feel it, the shift in the air, the small curve of warmth that comes off a body when it means to be kind. "To make sure you're okay." He said okay like a brother says it. Okay as in breathing, okay as in eating, okay as in, are you sleeping at all these days? I closed my eyes and the sound of tires on black ice skidded through my head, out of sequence because grief never learned how clocks work. "Remember the summer after high school?" he asked. "We stole that canoe. You rode like a drunk praying mantis." I almost smiled, almost. The memory tilted the world. The counter under my hand was real. The voice above it wore my friend like a kept promise. "Look at me," he said, but now the request wasn't a request. It was a slow hook set in the soft part under the ribs. "What are you afraid of?" "Everything," I didn't say. "What if it's you? What if it's not?" A knot of silence, then the smallest noise, a catch, like lips drying between words. He lowered his voice further. "I miss you." The words found the one door I hadn't locked inside myself. I lifted my gaze a fraction, no more than a reflex, a betrayal as automatic as a flinch. For the width of a heartbeat, I saw a face. It was almost his. The structure was right, the mouth the right shape, but the expression ran a second behind the sound like a bad dub. The eyes were too deep in the skull. The whites had the color of old paper left in the sun. When he tried to smile, the corners of his mouth obeyed, but something in the middle didn't get the message, and the result was a shape that understood smiling only as math. I snapped my eyes down so fast the room lurched. My stomach tried to climb into my throat. The bottle of water on the counter made a small, pitying cluck. "Hey," the voice said, brightening too quickly. "There you are." I didn't answer. I was busy trying not to let my hands shake. He tapped the jerky with his fingertip. Gentle, exactly the way he used to drum out songs when he couldn't sit still. The rhythm was right until the last beat, where it slipped and corrected too late. "I just wanted to see you," he said. "It's not a crime." "No." My tongue felt thick. "I can't." "You already did." A warmth brushed my wrist, too warm, like a coil left on. "Just one more time, for me." The rule sat on my tongue like a coin, never look customers in the face after 4. I swallowed it and felt its coldness travel down my throat. "Please," I said, and didn't know who I was pleading with. The store had shrunk to the size of the counter. The rest of the aisles could have been a city away. The coolers hummed on faithfully, as if the world were a machine that could be trusted. He waited. I counted to 5. I counted to 5 again. My friend used to hate counting. He said numbers turned people into furniture. He said time should be measured in songs. "Okay," he said at last, softer. "Okay, rule man." The smile in the voice landed closer to the center this time. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand me the bag. You're going to push the change closer. You're going to keep your eyes on that little scratch in the counter right there, the one you just noticed. And I'm going to walk out that door. And when I do, you're going to breathe." I did as I was told. My fingers found the scratch. I slid the bag, I slid the coins. The hand on the counter withdrew. For one insane second, I wanted to grab it and not let go. "Good to see you, Jack," he said, and the bell in his voice rang true enough to hurt. The door chimed. Air shifted. The steps receded. I stared at the scratch in the counter until it became a canyon. I listened for an engine turning over, headlights sweeping the glass. I heard neither. The station filled back up with station sounds. I let go of the counter. My palms had printed sweat into the varnish. I didn't look at the door. I didn't look at the glass. I didn't look at the aisles in case a face had decided to live in them. I looked at my hands. I looked at the notebook. I looked at the clock. 4:12. I had broken the rule. Not on purpose, not for heroics, just for a piece of a second, the way a lid slips and burns you even though you are careful. And the burn keeps singing after the water's dried. In the quiet that followed, something loosened inside me. I thought it might be relief, but it had a taste to it, metallic, old. It felt like a door somewhere had been opened a hair, exactly the width of a glance. I didn't open the notebook again. There were no more rules to read. The rest of the night stretched ahead like a narrow bridge with no railing. I stood behind the counter until my knees remembered bending and my jaw remembered it could unclench. When I finally dared to lift my eyes to the front door's glass, I saw only me looking back. For a second, the reflection smiled a half-second late. Then the lights hummed a little louder and it was just my face again, tired, older, a man who had almost kept all the rules. I went to the sink and washed my hands as if that might change what they had touched. When I came back, the counter had dried, but my palms remembered. They would for a while. Outside, the sky was beginning to consider the idea of grey. Morning existed somewhere, on its way here, none the wiser. I waited. Dawn bled slowly into the glass doors, soft grey turning pale blue, stretching thin across the aisles. The hum of the coolers sounded normal again, like they hadn't spent the whole night breathing with me. I was still behind the counter when the bell above the door jingled. My chest tightened. But it wasn't another customer. It was the manager. Thermos in hand, same tired shuffle, same quiet air of someone who hadn't seen what I had. "Morning?" he said easily, setting his coffee down. I forced my lips into something that might have been a smile. "Morning." He glanced around the store, nodded. "Looks good. You made it." He pulled a small envelope from his jacket and slid it across the counter. "First night's pay." The envelope felt heavy when I picked it up. Real money, more than I expected, enough to make my chest loosen, even with my hands still shaking. But the words slipped out before I could stop them. I didn't do it perfectly." The manager raised an eyebrow. I swallowed hard. I tried, but I was late turning off the lights. And I looked, just for a second, at a customer. The admission made my stomach twist. Saying it out loud felt like breaking the rules all over again. The manager sipped his coffee, calm as ever. Then he chuckled. "You think that's failing? Son, you'd be surprised how many don't even last till midnight." I stared at him. "So, I didn't ruin it? I didn't—" "You survived." He tapped the counter with one finger, steady. "That's what matters. You followed enough. You kept your head when it counted. That's more than most." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the echo of my friend's voice still crawled under my skin, whispering my name in the same breath as death. The manager poured himself coffee from his thermos, took a slow sip. "Not everyone makes it through the first night." "You did. That means you're the right kind of man for this job." I pressed the envelope into my pocket, the weight of it pulling against my chest. "I don't know if I can do it again." He shrugged, as if that were the simplest thing in the world. "That's up to you. Same time tomorrow if you want it. Nobody's forcing you." His words were casual, but I heard the truth behind them. If I came back, there'd be more rules. More nights. More things waiting in the silence. I walked to the door. My reflection met me in the glass, tired, hollow-eyed, but alive. Alive. When I stepped into the morning air, I felt the envelope press against my heart, heavier than fear. My family needed it. That thought alone almost made me turn back and say yes. Almost. I took a deep breath of cold air, tried to let the night fall behind me. but as I crossed the lot, I heard it again, soft and familiar, curling close to my ear. "Good to see you, Jack." I didn't look back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more. This is Midnight Jack, wishing you a safe night.